right, welcome back, man. We are rattling along here again. This is Paul Carby and
Yeah.
Ryan Sullivan, Wonkyfied, and we are talking about heroes.
Yep.
We're still in the nerd culture, but this is a focus on heroes, and we've started with again going back to the comic book canon, the eras of the comic books, and how those gravitated from the traditional innocent pure hero to the more complex hero, a hero in the first the golden age, that is broad strokes, right? I mean,
Right.
we have an origin story, but we don't know a lot about the person personally. That really changes as we move forward in the Bronze and Silver era.
Right.
And so that has led us from the virtuous hero, if you want to call it that,
Yep.
to a comparison to the dark hero. And so our episode today is really a comparison of those two models, right? And we're going to walk through a series of the dark, several dark heroes. And then now the thing is, we may get, because we're moving towards eventually the anti-hero, right?
Yep.
And so the anti-hero is different from the dark hero.
Yeah,
I think. And so I don't know if I want to go too deeply into distinguishing those two, but we can, we can at some point.
Right.
But we want to note that we're talking about why the dark / anti-hero is the way they are, and what about their past, and just find some commonality between those examples and give some. So that's kind of where we're headed, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely need to slot them on this continuum. And I think that's kind of what we're doing. We're sliding down the continuum where we have, the virtuous hero on one side, which we've already discussed and kind of talked about, this paragon status that almost would be like Superman, this idea where he's perfect, at least in almost every way possible. Obviously there's kryptonite, but, barring that, virtually
morally speaking, there's nothing.
Yeah. Morally speaking, truth, justice, in the American way.
Like Captain America, same thing.
Very much Captain America. These very dramatic stances on these ideologies. And as we move down the continuum, we're moving closer to this moral ambiguity. And so our stop off today, and I'm just going to be honest with you, I am so excited, guys. Today we get to talk about my favorite, which is Batman. And so nothing, I think, yes, I'm a DC fanboy, but it's hard, and I have some Marvel in here, but it's hard to really find a better example of the dark hero than the Dark Knight himself.
Now, all right. Speaking of a dark hero, maybe not villain, when is Warner Brothers going to get these movies right? That's
I don't know.
Right. We're kind of a few weeks removed from the Batgirl imbroglio and that mess, and Batman was, Michael Keaton was going to be in that, the Batman from the late 80s, early 90s.
And I was so excited, but then
they just said, we got to cut it because it's bad or something, 90 million, we'll just write. And I think from a business perspective, it was easier to write it off.
Yeah.
Smarter to write it off, which sounds crazy. But so we're
more money than I have.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No kid. Same here. So that's one of the, Batman versions, the Batman multiverse, if you want to call it that.
Absolutely.
But it just hasn't taken root. And so that I guess the most notable of the recent ones, it would be the Affleck version, which was more of the older, the Dark Knight era.
Robert Pattinson did a really good job of the most recent Batman. Every iteration of Batman brings a certain element, and as someone like myself who's truly beyond a fan and truly into the fanatic realm, I evaluate each one a little differently, and I kind of look at them in terms of overall as a character of Batman, and then Bruce Wayne as a character, and then how they represent the world as the character. And I think one of the best ones that has ever done that is the animated series. Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman, has given, I think, the best iteration of the character, in the way that Bruce Wayne is kind of a bumbling, very kind of unsure of himself. I mean, he's a playboy, yeah, but he's also very much just scattered.
He's got that Dwight Schrute suit going on.
Very much. Everything's like mustard
what is all
yellow.
that about? And I mean, that brown with the tie, you know, the yellow, the mustard
Every
yellow.
time you see him, every time.
Like, what is wrong with him? But yeah, he is kind of this trying to just like if you didn't, you know, if you don't know, if for the Gothamites who don't know that he's Batman, he's just this. Again, he's a billionaire, or you know, whatever at the time.
Very vapid in his presentation. He's very kind of just like, well, yeah, I guess I can do that. And it's amazing how Kevin Conroy, of course, Kevin Conroy, I'm a huge fan, Juilliard trained actor and voice actor. He actually was one of the first ones to provide, kind of taking in some ways cues from Michael Keaton, the distinction between the voice of Bruce Wayne and the voice of Batman, just by changing inflection and signifying almost an internal mental change. But what I love about this iteration is it really showcases, and you can see this also in even the way they did it. You know, the production, if you read behind the scenes of the production of Batman, the animated series, the one we're talking about from the 90s.
Yeah, 92 to 95 was it?
It was something like the early 90s to mid, yeah.
But it is considered to be the optimal version for a lot.
Absolutely. So many great voice actors, so many things that actually came out of that.
Yeah, that's canon now.
Yep, that changed canon. I mean, Harley Quinn was not even a character in the comics until the
right, exactly. Mr. Freeze.
Yep.
I mean, Mr. Freeze existed, but he was just this chump, you know, burglar.
Yep.
But then he had this rich, sad, tragic backstory.
Heart of Ice, I think.
Yeah, it's a top. That's a top 10. We probably need to go through a top 10 animated series episode list at some point, but that's got to be a top 10.
Absolutely.
The voice, and I can't remember who did the voice for that, but it was a beautiful. It was just so well, and that's really what this comes down to: the writing and the the writing and the animation were incredible,
and beautiful. The richness that they gave just the whole world. And that was kind of what I was going to talk about. In normal animation, whenever they do, of course, animated panels and things like that, they'll start off with white paper or some type of clear background. But in this, in order to present Gotham City as this just perennial dark world, they started off with black paper or dark paper, and they colored over it. And so everything about this reflects really and weighs on the character of Batman. And that's really kind of, I think, where we're going with this discussion today, is the idea of the dark character and why the dark character, is so important to the world at large, but why we as humans gravitate to it. What about that darkness, that grunginess, that grittiness of Gotham City that we are drawn to? That in a lot of, I mean, you would think that someone like this paragon of perfection in Superman, coming from small town USA, Smallville, would be, I mean, he is lasting for a reason. This is true, but why there's anything else underneath him, right? If he was significant, if he was sufficient, why would he not be the only one? Right. And I find it so fascinating that we still continue to find new dynamics to these stories that we want to gravitate to. And even if you go back and look at the creation of Batman, Bob Finger and Bill Kane, when they were kind of pitching these ideas, they were looking for a counterfoil to Superman. They wanted something that was not in the same really almost orthodox structured vein that Superman was. And so they originally pitched this idea of this crime fighter at night who had this secret persona, very much similar to the Shadow, and even kind of like Zorro, Don Diego de la Vega, who becomes Zorro at night or whatever. And so whereas Superman stood, even though he had his secret disguise, which was a pair of glasses, you know, I put on my specs and I'm someone else.
And at times hair that was a little bit, more disheveled and
Right, right.
yeah.
Even though he has somewhat of a disguise, Superman still would stand very much on who he is. This is me. I'm standing in the light. So why then do we have this cultural need or desire to find someone that stands in the darkness? And I think that's really kind of the essence of where the dark hero comes out. I think it's reflective of us. We realize that we don't reflect the perfect ideologue of Superman. We would like to, but that's not who we are. There's an internal flaw in the dark hero that we resonate with. There's an internal just grittiness.
So you think it's more reflective of who we are?
Absolutely.
And and we see life well. And we were talking about this. I had a conversation where someone said, "I hate to muddy the waters," but we muddy the waters with our mess, who we are.
Absolutely.
And so that's why Batman resonates and the dark characters resonate, because life is murky, life is muddy.
Yes.
And so we just relate to that more.
And I think we gravitate to that the sense that because this character is flawed, they are who they are. Well, I can sense that I have flaws. I've made mistakes because of these things, and there's a certain sense with the dark hero, how in almost every case, they're very much loners, or they tend to be very, introverted. I want to be left alone. I want to carry this burden of who I am alone. Batman, of course, has the Bat family, but other than Alfred, there's really no one close enough to him. He's actually at very many times come to shouting matches and blows with even all the Robins, Batgirl, Commissioner Gordon. Yeah. There have been times when they've disagreed. I think there's this sense where we resonate again with this idea that we bear this sometime burden. The world may look at it as, our past faults or our own humanity. I think we as Christians can say we resonate this fact that we bear our sin, and we bear the penance for that sin. We try to wrestle with this as Christians. Of course, we turn it over to the Lord, but there's still some sins. Even Paul said, I still do what I don't want to do. There's a darkness inside of me that wages war against me. And, even the Apostle Paul can recognize it. I think that we as all humans, whether we're Christian or not, we see the symbology of this tension inside ourselves.
Yeah. The scriptures, the both testaments that you have, what we read are, the narratives of these lives of people that lived and died, and how God used them, and the miraculous that happened, within them and around them. But yeah, there's a lot of that, especially with Paul's writing. Obviously we see some of the things that David did, for example, and we see some of the other, when Moses at time, the mistakes that they made, or some of the things that I go, well, God, you probably should have been gone a little lighter on him, like when Moses struck the rock. But with Paul, you can really sense that there is internal and external turmoil.
Yeah,
things he's grappling with. And so it's really just like, and this is something I think that'd be interesting. You go, just like we look at our superheroes, and the origin story is so fascinating and really, and I'm guessing you probably know whether the Batman was the first publication, the origin story. Did they start with that? They didn't flash back to it? Did they go straight to the origin story? If they, I'm just thinking they did, but
I'm trying to think. In Detective Comics 27, I think is what it was, 29, 27, something like that, was the first appearance of Batman. That was 39, but he actually got Batman number 1 in 1940. I think Batman number 1 was the one that truly introduced it, because they introduced all the staples. There was a Robin character introduced, Catwoman was introduced, Jim Gordon was introduced, and the Joker was introduced. So all those things that are kind of the iconic and Alfred, and the staples of Batman were all kind of there in 1940 in Batman #1. So I'm pretty sure, I don't know this for fact, but I'm pretty sure the origin story came in that episode or that issue.
Okay. And so previously he didn't have his own.
Yeah, I think he was just known to be Bruce Wayne, this playboy who liked to follow along cop.
It was like 37 or 39, actually 27 or 29. Was that strictly a Batman comic book, or was that a collection of serials? Or
that's a great question. I don't know that. Gosh, you give me something to research.
Give you something to do.
I know. I want to say it was very short, if I remember correctly. I want to say it might have been like 2 different stories. I do know that there was one where he's taking on some thugs, gangster type people, and that's he's using a gun. I mean, he's very, very violent, and so I'm pretty sure that when they retconned it into Batman #1, I'm pretty sure that was where we started getting that formalized no guns, no killing type thing. So yeah, the first one is kind of like one of those things where the pilot episode never gets aired. I mean, obviously it was out there and you can find it, but I think it's very different from what we know Batman to be.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, great. So but I think about we have an origin story. Paul has an origin story. The characters have biblical, not characters, people. Those figures, they have origin stories, and those are like David, and those are fascinating. But Paul's origin story connects directly to his vulnerability, weakness, his human frailty, his human nature, and we also, and some of that you don't have to fill in the blanks, but some of that you do, because he's always talking about these afflictions he's had, and you're not sure what those are and what's going on, or if it's actually a physical affliction or an internal affliction.
Yeah.
But he probably has to fight, I would think that he has to fight. Hey, I was, I was on the fast track, Sanhedrin, right? And so I gave all that up.
Yep.
And for this. And so, I mean, he's still obviously highly regarded and still has, Council of Nicene still has some significant platforms, but there's got to be something like some late at night he probably had to grapple with that.
Yes.
So,
and he talks about that. I mean, we got 2 Corinthians being one of the most prevalent, where he talks about all the afflictions he went through, his whole list, stranded at sea, left for dead, given 39 lashes, I think 4 or 5 times. All these different, elements that kind of went in his struggles. In Philippians, he talks about how if anyone has room to brag, I have just as much, and kind of talks through that whole almost his CV of the things that are that give him the credentials. But you're right, this idea of the thorn in the flesh that keeps him humble. And really, if we wanted to qualify, I think we could qualify Paul as a dark hero. Because let's look at our definition, right? Our working definition is still follows their own internal sense of compass, their own internal sense of right and wrong, that generally coincides with what we would consider to be right and wrong. Paul obviously follows Christian principles. He does what's right, but still bears the weight of some past failure, some past sin, which I believe that Paul definitely did. I think it was always forefront in his mind what he pursued. I mean, he even says in Philippians, I was blameless according to the law. In terms of a position, I was a persecutor of Christians. I think he knew very well what he came from. I think he found freedom in Christ in that, but I don't think he ever truly forgot it.
Yeah.
And so, also this idea of their internal conflict, their internal flaws that make them more human. Paul obviously had those. We have Romans 7, 2 Corinthians 12, both talking about his, whatever it is. Some people think it was a physical deformity. Right. I'm going to be honest and just lay my cards down. I think he struggled with some sin issues. primarily, and the way he describes them, especially when you take in Ephesians 6, as he talks about the battle between not with flesh and blood, but with the spiritual forces. I think Paul was wrestling with some sin issues.
I agree with that. I mean,
we could speculate kind of on what they are, but I definitely think that there was something internal that he struggled with. And so we see Paul very much in line with this dark hero, but still a hero nonetheless. I mean, what are the traits of the hero? We talked about that with Superman. Going back to Joseph Campbell, they come from some sense of mundane world to a calling that leads them to another world that they can't go back to. There's this journey process. I mean, Paul very much came out of his mundane world of, like you said, the Sanhedrin, to the road to Damascus, where he was called by the Lord, and then he had to go through an ordeal, the being blind, the traveling around, seeing, like we said, I went to stay with Peter for a while. I went and saw the disciples and learned, and then his numerous journeys, and then ultimately bringing the gospel to the darkest place of the world. I think Paul would definitely follow that. And we see this, this example replicated in other examples of dark heroes.
And I think that's part of it. It sometimes it's hard for people to understand that dark heroes are still heroes. But if you
absolutely,
you could do this a couple of ways. We've talked about obviously the Campbell process, and we all see that the dark heroes went through that process. Batman certainly went through that process.
Yep.
Depending on was the whole Raja Ghul, was the training that was part of the original canon, right? Where he goes off and learns the corrupt. He did something.
Yes, Ra's al Ghul, in some regards, is and is not a part of it. That was more the Nolan idea, but there is, yes, very much a training component where Batman, as a young man, leaves and comes back changed. He goes. I think. If I'm thinking about canon properly, we're talking about 8 to 10 years. He's gone from Gotham City, and he comes back this fully formed, vigilante character. He's become sharpened. He's become weaponized.
I didn't know it was that long.
Yeah, I want to say it was like around 8 to 10 years. Again, someone could clarify me on that, but I want to say it was. It wasn't longer than 10.
That's quite a while.
Yeah.
It's like Groundhog Day. You just never know how many days he spent it. Some people say 35 years, some people say 10,000 years. Who knows? But, and of course, when they have just if you want to call it a movie montage or even sort of that time passage in a comic book, sometimes it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
But so he was a kid when he went, and then young man when he comes back, or
yes, yeah. So the timeline compresses somewhat, but the idea is that some places say 8 years old, some places say as old as 12 years old, but around that 8 to 10 range, young Bruce Wayne sees his parents get murdered by Joe Chill in the alley behind the Monarch Theater. That sends him on this desire to become an avenger of those who can't defend themselves. At some point, he leaves as a late teenager, 16, 17 years old, comes back to Gotham after having trained and spent his family fortune traveling the world. Most people would probably put Batman in what we would consider year one at around 24, 25. Okay, that by the way is probably younger than I thought. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So that's a lot of good background. Now, of course, the other issue is with one of the fascinating facets of a dark, and one of the things we'll probably have to deal with from a question perspective is what is the difference between a dark hero and an anti-hero?
Yes.
But I think one of the differences, but the origin story is very critical. A note with Batman's origin story, a lot of his origin stories, like Paul or Saul, he was Saul at the time, his origin story involved decisions he made as an adult. And so while he changed and while the origin story transformed him, he was, if you want to say the master of his own life, if you will, he had called these shots. and had decided on this particular path, right? Whereas Batman did not and had no
Yes.
right, had no path forward. But I guess, so that would be something interesting to discuss. I would also note, I think the difference between a dark hero and an anti-hero is a dark hero still kind of splits the difference between the virtuous hero and the anti-hero, because the dark hero is still pursuing, like Batman, he still is doing what he is doing for the common good.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I think this is really where we can start to make this distinction. I think the difference between the dark hero and the anti-hero is that they still follow a good end. There is some end that they're pursuing that is obviously, like I said, beneficial to the rest of society. But the difference between the virtuous hero and the dark hero, I think, comes down to the difference between the means being justified by the ends. In the virtuous hero, the means matter. How you get to that end matters. Superman, very much the paragon, the means matter. But in the case of Batman, Batman has numerous times displayed that he has zero problem hurting, wounding, breaking bones, paralyzing criminals. I mean, it's brutal, which is why I think that the Ben Affleck iteration of Batman, and to some degree this new Robert Pattinson iteration of Batman, provides a really interesting dynamic in that they're both very brutal. There's a visceralness there. The fight that Ben Affleck's Batman gets in the warehouse in Dawn of Justice, Batman versus Superman, is probably my favorite cinematic fight, because it showcases just the brutality that Batman is known for. We picture him as this kind of sometimes campy Adam West, haha, I'm gonna,
Right.
engage in fisticuffs with you. But that was never, or at least not in the more modern iterations of Batman, how we would view it. It was very much a, subdue an opponent and move on.
Prepare for a kerfuffle.
Yep.
Prepare for a Donnybrook. Yeah. I think also part of that, though, is like the Marvel movies, the
Yes.
fighting. Why people love the Marvel movie, the fighting is very unrealistic, and you don't see the blood, you don't see the visceral. It's people kind of take that comic book version for granted, that they just fight, people get hurt. But when
that's a great example too. And to my Marvel fans out here, here's your bone that I'm going to throw to you. I had a problem with the first X-Men movie giving this human buzzsaw that is Wolverine no one to use that on. He did more damage to the Statue of Liberty when he spun around the crown thing and cut off a part of it than did the whole movie. And they changed that in X2, where they realized, wait a minute, you can't have this, again, dark hero, this killing machine with giant razor blades on his hands, not doing something. And so they unleashed him into what we would think of as Wolverine. But Wolverine is a great example from the Marvel side of what a dark hero is. Again, coming from that past, carrying this lone kind of storyline with the sins of his past weighing on him. Logan walks this path alone for well over a century. He's very old. And carrying this guilt and this pain of the lives he's hurt and the people he's wounded and killed. And so you see, and it's such an interesting difference between him, Wolverine, Logan, and let's say the other kind of paragon character in his world in the Marvel realm, which would be something like Scott Summers, Cyclops, very much the team leader, very much the rule follower, very much this is the way we do this by the book, according to Professor X. Whereas Logan is very much the, no, thank you. I'm going to go do this my way. I'm the best at what I do.
And when it comes to popularity, Cyclops doesn't have a chance. It's over.
They even killed him off.
People want to be Wolverine, right?
Absolutely.
Because, and I think one of the reasons they did is because the way it's written, the dark hero breaks the rules but still wins. Logan. I haven't seen all the X-Men movies, but I saw Logan, and that was an excellent movie. Did you see Logan?
I haven't seen it, no, but I've heard it was great.
Well, it's like The Unforgiven.
Yeah.
If you've seen Unforgiven.
It's very Western. I've heard it's kind of very much
yeah.
like that Western feel.
Well, that's one of the things I will mention when we get to the anti-hero and the discussion of Westerns. A lot of these movies that are not set these days, they say the Western is dead, but a lot of these movies are Western.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
it's just, they don't have cowboy hats and horses, but it's still, I mean, they would, again, some of the more famous producers, writers, showrunners, whatever you say, Vince Gilligan, Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and Tarantino, they were weaned on.
Oh yeah, very much.
So
Robert Rodriguez, very much with his Mariachi trilogy, and even Joss Whedon with Firefly. I mean, that was a Western in space.
Yeah, well, I mean, they have those. Yeah, it absolutely. So, but the that character deals with the same regret. Well, money does, and has the same issues. And so, Batman, Wolverine, and also Bond, the James,
yes,
movie, that guy, same thing, Dark Hero.
I think James Bond is another great example of the dark hero. I mean, we love Bond. I mean, I grew up. I'm a huge Bond fan as well. Very much. I was a Connery purist until Daniel Craig came along, and then it's like, okay, I got to give it up to Daniel Craig. He probably is the best iteration of Bond because he portrays that so well.
He's an excellent Bond, but he plays all of that darkness.
Oh, absolutely.
That's on the
absolutely. It's very much the tortured, soul that, I mean, because let's be honest, Bond is not a good guy. I mean, he, obviously he lies, he cheats, he kills, he steals, borderline alcoholic. I mean, totally a ladies' man, carousing all the time with women. I mean, he very much is this kind of dark element. I mean, he's really a flawed character. Probably more so than all these other ones we mentioned. I mean, he's got some serious psychological, emotional scars. Yeah. But he carries with him such a weird sense of morals that guides him far beyond the kind of mundane, everyday, what we would consider mundanity in terms of, well, should I do this or should I not? As it relates to people, he carries this overall drive to see his goal completed, and his goals generally follow the good. And so he is definitely the epitome of the means are justified by the end.
I think it's a part of the purpose of the dark hero. Again, and what we're going to note is as we connect the virtuous, the dark, and the anti-hero, the dark hero again falls under the I'm doing this for something bigger than myself, whereas the anti-hero does not. The anti-hero, at least on the surface,
yes,
fully focused on their own own goals, but they somehow accidentally fall into heroism.
Somehow, or maybe even at times dip a toe in it, right. But
yeah, and sometimes, when we say anti-hero, sometimes they're just the hero because they're the main protagonist. We don't know if they're even necessarily a hero, but especially with some of the more recent iterations like Sopranos or whatever, those are not heroes.
No,
but there is some hero aspect to the spaghetti western versions we'll discuss, but the dark hero still has this. I have to do this, and it like Bond is very much the crown needs this. The crown needs me, and there's this functionality to this pragmatism for all of these. That I think connects Batman, Wolverine, and Bond, which is okay. Yeah, they're ultra violent. Yeah, they engage in things. They engage their own rule book, and they don't certainly they focus on the ends as opposed to the means, and if some heads or eggs get cracked, that's how it goes, right?
Yep.
But they probably also, especially with Bond, since Bond is an employee technically, probably this sense that the crown needs what Bond brings and nobody else can bring it.
Right.
And then, I guess Wolverine technically is part of the Logan's, part of the X-Men. So they fill a gap.
Yep.
That must be filled, and it can only be filled with their unique set of skills and their unique persona.
That's a great point.
Somebody else couldn't do it.
That's a great point. And, now that you say that, it kind of really brings to mind. I mean, Wolverine is notorious for saying, I'm the best at what I do. In other words, you call me when you want it messy. Bond, same thing. He's the best at what he does. Even Batman has numerous times hinted to the fact, I can't remember the exact verbiage, but numerous times has hinted to the fact that I go and do the things that nobody else can and will do. I am the one that has to do this.
Well, that's very much the Dark Knight, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe one component that I hadn't even thought about that you just brought up.
I have to take the hit for that. I need to take the hit for this.
Yes, my moral compass is tethered to the fact that my uniqueness is the only fit for this, and maybe that's what keeps them from pushing themselves over. Maybe that's the tether that holds them to the good. I cannot give in, because if I do, I become the things that I hate. Right. And I am the only one that has to.
And there's a real sense of sacrifice too.
Yep.
Absolutely. Very much. Perhaps even more so than the virtuous.
Absolutely. I mean, Bond perennially single,
not everyone.
Well, I mean, yeah, he has his moments.
Yeah.
But even in both real canon iterations, and of course in the newest Daniel Craig ones, Vesper, the woman he loved truly, at the beginning, of course, it's taken from him.
In the book, I never read the books, but he did have a wife.
He did have a wife, Teresa Bond, who I think was killed in maybe the Living Daylights, not the Living Daylights.
It was it's late 60s. It was the George Lazenby one, which was this one-off Bond, but the wife was the famed Diana Rigg. So so she was a big deal, but he was that was his only Bond.
And so wife dies. Of course, Batman. The Bachelor had numerous relationships, but never anything stable. It's just this. I think there's this solidarity of purpose as they go through their life trying to find their place. The only thing that they have to gravitate to is a sense of purpose, and I think the sense of purpose is that anchor that holds them in reality. Without that sense of purpose, obviously Bond's a killing machine. Bruce Wayne could easily be the most heinous thing on the planet. He's shown it. In fact, they had a comic run where Bruce Wayne gets taken over by Joker gas and becomes the Batman who laughs. So he's got the evilness of Joker, but all the abilities of Batman, and it just wrecks house throughout DC. Wolverine left alone to his own devices is virtually unkillable and can destroy anything. So you see, like you said, this internal sacrifice, this dying to self, that they cannot fulfill their truest purpose, because this purpose that they hold to be most important is the one that benefits society. And I think that's what makes them that hero still.
And what's great, I even think of of all the iterations of Batman, like the Lego Batman movie, where that was the whole point, that he was a loner, he was isolated, and he couldn't even develop a commonality. He couldn't say that I need the Joker. Like he's like, I don't need you. I don't need anything. I am this individual, and my individual skills are in a place where they have to, where society needs me. And they all have that connection where they like, and obviously they could if they chose to, move romantically with a particular woman, they would have no issue because they're all bad boys. So,
Yeah.
they they all attract him, right? So they don't have an issue at all.
Poor Jean Grey.
Yeah, exactly. He's a bad boy. Everybody loves the bad boy. So but that's where that's why Logan, there's this poignance to it, right? Because you're like, they can't, and that's what I think probably separates it from the virtuous. There's this poignance where they just cannot, certain aspects, and that's where we separate from. There's these ways that we connect with the dark hero, like you said. We have all these sin, we have our sin nature, but there's other things that like we really could not sacrifice.
Right.
We really could not say, okay, I'm going to trade my relationships, my marriage, everything that I've built, not just financially, but from a human perspective, for complete isolation.
Right.
Just for a variety of reasons, up to including that if I did have those entanglements, for lack of a better term, and somebody found out those entanglements were entangled with Batman and what have you, for example, they'd all they'd die. Somebody would kill them.
Right.
So you have you have this sense that they have to carry this torch, and they don't have, and then what should be, there is some benefit to it, but there's also this accepted loss.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we also kind of can't forget to flesh out, another reason why I think that we are so drawn to them as people. One, going back to the fact that we're inherently flawed, I think there's a sense of indulgence that they embody that we, like you said, can't. You and I are both married, we have families, we have kids, we have jobs. There's an indulgence, and if my wife hears this, please don't think this is the life I want, but there's this indulgence that James Bond has, that he travels the world, he has the coolest toys, he drinks and carouses with women. There's this sense of indulgence that they allow themselves almost as the counterpoint to that purpose. Batman unleashes his vengeance and his fury on people in ways that, frankly, at times, some of us kind of wish we could. I kind of wish I could, but we don't. But yet we see that indulgence in him. We have
limitations and barriers that he does not possess.
Absolutely. And I think that's so. If there's a reason why we gravitate toward them, I think it's because they're flawed and because we reflect that. But is there a reason why they are really taking root more so in culture than the virtuous hero and becoming more glamorized than the virtuous hero? I think it's because of that indulgence factor. We resonate with that more, the desire to indulge more than the desire to be paragons.
And so I think that does speak to how we relate to our heroes, and whether if we can both agree that we seek to replicate our heroes. That's this dark version is what the world is replicating now.
Absolutely.
Because it's convenient. Maybe it's because it's just what's there. Maybe it's because people just, I think a lot of it, we talked about this POMO world, postmodern world now. People just believe that's the way it is, and that's the way they want it to be. And so that's what gains traction.
The objectiveness of the former virtuous paragon has gone by the wayside. Things are no longer truth, justice, and the American way. It seems like you said, this kind of POMO mentality, we've gone to less black and white, far more gray. And it is in those grays that we try to find our own personality. And this is where these characters live. They live in total shades of gray.
Let me give you what I would see as the POMO version of truth, justice, and the American way. Truth is in the eye of the beholder. Justice is for those who can afford it. And the American way is corruption and sweeping things under the rug and making things look pristine.
Yep.
There is dirt and grime and blood and loss that we don't see.
Absolutely.
So that's that's how I would see the.
And
Maybe that's more nihilistic than Pomo. I don't know, but
no, but what a great example of Gotham City. It's gritty and bloody and dirty behind the scenes. You know, it is very much, justice for those who can afford it. The elite of Gotham have the power. That's why Batman fights for those who can't afford it for himself. Pretty much everything you said, truth is relative. I mean, Jim Gordon stands as this one shining light in an entire police force of corruption. And so I think that and this is actually why I think the show, I think I mentioned this before, the show Gotham really appealed to me, because the main character of the show Gotham, and if you guys have never seen it, I would encourage you to watch it. Just force your way through the first season, because that's a little boring. But once you get through that, you truly see that the city of Gotham is the main character. It's not Bruce Wayne. It's not Jim Gordon. It's not anyone else. It's the city of Gotham itself. That is the character, because you see it evolving in real time with all these other people and characters. And what a perfect example of everything you just said, but Gotham City. I mean, that is the embodiment of everything you just said.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, they see that as the embodiment of America, and they see and you can have this different interpretation of our manifest destiny and how we went, how the United States went from being this colony to this exemplar, and the city on the shining city on the hill, or is it the city on the shining hill, the shining city, and the wealth, the abundance, and the people who just found a way to make it happen. They'll say, well, there's a lot of stuff, and they would say with anything that matters, there's a lot of just muddling through. There's a lot of bad stuff. There's a lot of eggs that are cracked to get to make the omelet, to get to where you want. And we don't talk about that in the history books, and that's a true, I guess, Pomo narrative. Absolutely. So we, and so that applies to the dark hero, but I think even the Pomo would probably be even more applicable to the anti-hero.
Yeah, I definitely think that the anti-hero is the poster child, whereas the dark hero takes, I think, most of its cultural narrative roots from a postmodern world mindset. The rise of the anti-hero truly, I think, is the poster child of the postmodern. And I know we're going to talk more about this later, and there's a lot of great examples, especially in modern cultural society. What I find interesting is you don't have a lot of examples chronologically in the past, because this is more of we're moving down the continuum to a more contemporary timeline. And so, yeah, Batman is just as prevalent now, but he's become darker over the years. We have these other heroes that picked up in the late 70s, early 80s, and have become more and more popular now.
It'd be interesting to have a show, what I call a generations show, the Generations Roundtable, where we compare, we just have like 4 or 5 guys sit down and go, okay, tell me about your Batman.
Absolutely. You get some very different versions.
Yeah. What is your Batman? Who's your Batman?
Yeah.
And so, you would, you get completely different answers, right? So
you get some very strange ones.
You'd get the golden Batman, golden age Batman, just straightforward, and then you would get the gritty, the 60s Batman, and then the gritty. Yeah, it would be interesting. But
as we talk about the anti-hero, which I know we're coming into this episode, and we don't want to spoil anything for next episode. I think it's important for our listeners to know that there is still this very much shearing line distinction. The virtuous hero and the dark hero still stand on the side of good,
right?
Predominantly, the virtuous hero tries its best to walk that line exceptionally. The dark hero could care less about the convention so long as the good is still done.
The elevator comparison to me would be the virtuous hero does the right thing the right way for the right reasons.
Yep.
The dark hero does the right thing the wrong way, but still for the right reasons.
Yes.
And so, yeah, but still, there's still a lot of there's still heroism.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we're going to step across that line and show how they're still a hero under the almost Joseph Campbell sense, but yet they are definitely not good people for good reasons.
No, they're not. And that's right. This is, yeah. When we step into the anti-hero, that's a completely different element. It's a completely different baby. But even more so than, as we're going to discuss, even more so than the dark hero, the anti-hero is very prominent.
Yes.
And so
especially in today's society.
It's something that we have to really hop in and compare. And so, yeah, I think we need to create some resources so people can compare them. You guys, out there in the podcast world Wonkyfied world can look at the differences in the examples. But yeah, we're about to jump into a knee-deep examination of the anti-hero and how it came about and its origin and the difference between it and the other two. So good stuff. Any final thoughts on the dark hero?
No. Go out and check out some Batman comics. Get caught up.
Yeah, exactly. And Wolverine and watch a Bond.
Yeah, Wolverine. Go watch a Bond movie.
Yeah. Probably Connery or Craig though.
Yeah.
Because they definitely play up the anti-hero more than the others. I mean, I like the others, but they do. All right. That's episode 17, everyone. Until next time, look forward to it. Virtuous, dark, and now we're moving to the anti-hero. Talk to you later.